strangers to each other. At last we drew into the port of Calais. "We've done it! We're in France!" Nick tugged excitedly at my sleeve. "We're proper sailors, we are!" The little cottages with their queer tiled roofs shambled in higgledy-piggledy jumble up towards the king's mighty castle. Its pale towers and turrets looked slender and ghostly in the rainy mist. The long grey arms of the harbour stretched out to welcome us, and little boats danced towards us like streams of unleashed dogs running to greet their masters. Gunners fired cannons, and the shots echoed from all the walls of town. The king's flags and banners fluttered like waving hands. Our anchor was lowered with a grumbling and groaning of chain and rope, and a mighty splash as it hit the water. An army of soldiers dressed in red and blue were the first to disembark, beating drums as they were rowed into the harbour. Next, the nobles and other highborns were taken ashore, and they had so much to be carried by the way of gifts and fine clothes, so much to be heaped into the waiting rowboats, and there was so much to do with the ropes and sails that nobody took any notice of us scurrying backwards and forwards like ship's mice. At last all the nobles were landed and strolling off to their lodging round the town, and in the massive castle they dominated it. The Lion and the Sweepstake lay at ease outside the harbour, waiting for the future Queen of England to be brought on board. Nobody knew who we were. Nobody cared. Our captain was too busy to notice us. We jumped ashore with one of the boats and hauled the last 2 wooden chests that were bulging with gifts onto the waiting wheelbarrows. Then we looked at each other, looked back at our ships, and ran. We simply ducked our heads and scampered away, a pair of brown ship's mice lost among the crowd. Bells were pealing all round the little port, flags flying, trumpets blaring, cannons firing from the castle ramparts. Flocks of apprentices, merchants, women with little children jostled together, waving coloured ribbons and shouting excitedly. It seemed as if all the people of Calais had come out that day to see King Henry's ships put in spite of the chilly December rain swirling round their faces. I darted ahead of Nick, dodging between a group of apprentice boys dressed in the same brown woolen clothes as us. It was easy to mingle with them. Nick caught up with me at last, panting. "You definitely learned how to run," he chuckled, gasping for breath. The street was slippery with so much rain and so many scurrying feet, and I slipped and fell a couple of times, smearing myself with mud. I didn't care. I could see the huge main gate to the castle now, and nothing was going to stop me. I sprinted through in the wake of a pushing crowd of Calais schoolboys, straight into the cobbled entrance yard. And there, at once, like a gift from my guardian angel, I saw my sister. I hardly recognised her at first. She was with a cluster of girls, maids of honour, ladies-in-waiting, and young noblemen's wives. They were all giggling and talking excitedly, clutching one another's hands and laughing at private jokes. Marjorie looked taller than the last time I saw her, and not so plump and awkward. She was jumping up to see over a woman's head, and then she clutched another girl's hand and ran to be at the front of the group. I had never seen her looking so happy. I ran forward, waving my hands and shouting, "Marjorie! Marjorie!" across the crowd. She turned her head this way and that, craning to see where the voice was coming from. She looked straight at me and away again. She didn't know me. I had changed as much as she had. We were strangers to each other. As I struggled to get nearer, a bearded nobleman came up to her and put a warm cloak round her shoulders, lifting up her hood to hide her face from the rain, and she stood on her toes and kissed him, full on the lips, and pulled away, laughing up at him. I must be mistaken, I thought. This couldn't be my sister. This man couldn't be her ugly old husband. Crowds pressed between us, so I couldn't see them anymore. I dodged round with Nick, following close behind me. When I got to the front, the girl had gone, along with all her friends, like a flock of birds. The man who had kissed her was still there, watching after them with a smile on her face. He turned to his waiting page and called, "Make sure Lady Marjorie changes into dry clothes." The boy bowed and hurried after his sister. "It must be him," I said to Nick. "I have to speak to him, now." "I wouldn't, not yet," Nick warned, but I was so excited that I took no notice. "Give me the ring," I insisted. I pulled it from his neck and looped the cord around over my head. "Be careful," he called. The man was already turning away. A flock of nuns passed in front of him, their brown habits flapping like cold sparrows. I pushed my way through them. I ran to him and I put my hand on his arm. "Lord Richard of Carlisle?" I asked. He shook his arm in annoyance and frowned down at me. "There's a beggar's gate at the back of the castle," he said. "Go there for your scraps." "Lord Richard, please don't turn away from me. I'm Marjorie's brother." He paused, looked briefly at me, and raised his hand. Immediately 2 soldiers moved forward. One grasped me, pulling my hands behind my back. Nick ran out of the crowd and tried to pull me away, and he was immediately grabbed by the other soldier. They started hustling us away, and we squirmed and struggled to break free. Lord Richard walked off as if he was turning his back on dogs fighting in the street. "I'm William," I shouted desperately. "She must have talked to you about me. I come from Montague Hall. Marjorie is my sister. Please, please let me speak to you." The soldier who was dragging me away flicked the back of his hand across my face. I shouted again, "Lord Richard, I am the son of Lord Robert Montague." I struggled round and saw that Richard had paused. He still had his back to me, but his head turned to one side. He was listening. The soldier kicked me on, and in desperation I shouted all again in French. He turned and looked at me. I said it again in Greek. It wasn't good Greek, I knew, but it was more than an ordinary ship's boy could do. He signalled to the soldier to let go, and I dropped to my knees. Nick stood with his hands on his hips, glaring defiantly at the soldiers. "Lord Richard, really and truly, I am William Montague, grandson of Sir Henry Montague, brother of your wife, Marjorie." I said the whole thing and more, begging him to take me to my sister. I gave him her birth date. I told him she was afraid of dragons and that she wasn't a very good dancer, and I did it all in perfect Latin. Lord Richard smiled and came back to me. He touched my bowed head and told me to stand up. "How come a common boy like you is such a scholar?" "Because I am who I say I am, William Montague, the grandson of Sir Henry and son of Robert. My ancestor was Walter Montague." I pulled the cord around my neck. "And this is my family seal." Lord Richard took the ring from me and turned it over in his hand, curious and mystified. "Take no notice of him. He's a thief and a beggar." A voice came from behind me, and I closed my eyes and sighed. I knew who it was, even before I turned to look at the pallid face of Lord Percy Howard. "He stole that ring. The person he pretends to be is wanted for treason," he laughed. "My advice to you is to throw this boy into a cell along with his grubby friend and let him rot." He strode up to Lord Richard, put an arm round his shoulders and walked him away, whispering to him intently. For a moment, Lord Richard turned and looked at me. Then he made a signal to the soldiers and walked on with Percy. The soldiers dragged Nick across the yard as if we were bundles of rags, and I ran after him, begging them to leave him alone, not to hurt him. They opened a heavy studded door and threw him inside a room, and bowed mockingly to me. I followed as they shut the huge studded door behind us.